Production. We will take a peek at how a very abstract firm makes decisions about how much to produce and which or how many inputs to use. So we start with an abstract production function. A firm takes in certain inputs and creates output. Now, this might be profoundly transformative. Farm uses seeds, land, and people to create yummy foods. Or it could be rather minimal. A delivery company takes inputs from one place and brings them somewhere else. Usually it's a problem if the input has been transformed with, dings or dents or breakage or things. But that's still really important. Most of us get to school because the MTA delivered us from one location to another. But still, these very different types of production can still be reduced to an abstract production function. We'll look at one output at a time, although a lot of actual firms might produce a variety of outputs. A coffee shop offers espresso or latte or iced. Usually they offer some tea, other drinks, various food items. But anyway, to make this single output, there are a wide variety of possible inputs. I'll go through a few broad categories, but we could argue about many of the boundaries here. First is labor, the work of human beings. This work can have a huge variety of types. Some human input is simple muscle power, like lifting heavy things. Some is fine manipulation, putting that nice design on the top of the latte. Some is monitoring that some other process is going properly, pouring the drink. Some is managing the people who are doing those previous types of work. Some is coming up with new ideas about what work could be done. There are various skills involved, previous amounts of training and education. The next category is capital goods, from machinery and equipment to fertilizer and tractors to the inventory available for sale. Then there's technology, such as the blueprint of some item to be produced, or the web page or the code running the analytics. Then land or real estate for where the firm is located. Natural resources, whether the sunlight and the rain that falls on a farm, or the material dug out of a mine, or the clean air that the workers need. I've added management and entrepreneurship as well. We could argue that's part of labor, or if it's different enough, it all depends. And note I'm using function in a very mathy sense. Some list of numbers goes in and a different number goes out. The level of abstraction can be frustrating at times, but it allows us to concentrate on certain things at certain times. Calculus is incredibly useful in understanding the world. To try to understand this function, we start by wiggling the knobs. What happens to output when any single one of the inputs is changed? That gives us the marginal product, the amount that output increases when an input is increased by 1 unit, whatever that unit is. Let's not get too hand-wavy with units. It's worth at least noting that it should all have some common basis in terms of time unit. If a business is hiring workers by the hour and making decisions about how many hours more to take, then the rest of the units should be by the hour as well. Now, obviously, most businesses don't pay rent by the hour. They probably got a lease, maybe goes a month or more. Some of the machinery is purchased and it will last for years. So it's actually not at all simple to try to get the units of all the inputs to even line up for time. But it's useful for understanding the world, such as how many business units are happy to rent machinery. Right? It helps the accounting. But eventually we can figure out what is delta y over delta x, where x is each one of those inputs. The ratio of those deltas is the marginal product. In multivariate calculus, this would be the partial derivatives. Now note that for all these calculations, we're only considering what-if scenarios. What would happen if one of the inputs were increased? As a separate question from how much would it cost to increase an input, or is that a good business decision? So often in economics, we break down big questions into a series of smaller questions, one thing at a time. To get closer to business decisions, we want to understand marginal cost, which is how much cost changes when we increment output by a small amount. This is a local concept. How much does cost increase if the business sells just a little bit more? That's a coherent question, although it has to carry a lot of details. For a restaurant, to sell one more meal might be quite inexpensive, which is why they often let employees eat for free. But to open another restaurant location might be rather more, and certainly is over a different time horizon. But we can often think of splitting the decisions about how much more output costs, the marginal cost, from how much more can be made by different input combinations. This split of decisions can be useful because particular people can focus on different questions. Sometimes these decisions are made by different businesses entirely, sometimes just by different business units within one firm. A startup manufacturing some new item might source a good deal of it from overseas. The startup here in New York doesn't care much exactly how it's manufactured, whether it uses machinery or labor to make this thing. They just know it costs a certain amount, and they can make decisions from that basis. A multinational corporation is likely the same situation. If a U.S. office needs more items to sell, all they need to know from the manufacturing unit is how much does it cost? Manufacturing unit cares about marginal products. They're trying to figure out the lowest cost way to make that more output. Then their buyers only care about how much the output costs. The extreme assumption is that the buyer doesn't care and doesn't need to know. Now, obviously, in the real world, that may not be quite true. Some buyers want organic, some want to ensure there were no child laborers, etc. But in general, it may not be a bad assumption. Now, as I mentioned before, the time horizon is really important. If a restaurant is really popular, then in the very short run, there will be lines of customers. They can open later or start earlier, pay overtime to their people. They get more equipment, maybe larger pots in the kitchen to make more food. They can do renovations to expand the kitchen. They can squeeze in more tables. They can open a new location. But only over longer time horizons. In the short run, they have fewer options. If they get slammed with a lot of customers in an hour, they can't just open a new location. They have to work faster and/or customers have to wait longer. The restaurant's rent is a fixed cost, usually per month. They pay it no matter how many customers they have. Farms usually have fixed costs over a growing season for the land that they farm. Now, in the long run, all costs are variable. The company can eventually get out of its lease, which means over longer time horizons, supply can vary more. It can be more responsive. If prices are high in the short run, it might be difficult to produce more. But in the longer run, supply can be increased. Or if prices are low, then in the short run, the firm might sell at a loss, but in the longer run, they might just shut down.